Let's talk about diesel engines for VW T5 minivans. Pre-restyling cars received a 4.1.9 TDI and a 5.2.5 TDI with pump injectors. These engines introduced fans of VW buses closer to a dual-mass flywheel and a particulate filter, if the engine initially complied with Euro 4 standards. 1.9 TDI PD, AXC 85 horsepower. 1.9 TDI PD, BRR 84 horsepower. 1.9 TDI PD, BRS 102 horsepower. 1.9 TDI PD, AXB 105 horsepower. In general, other than unconvincing power, there are no questions about this engine in the VW T5. However, you should not relax either during operation or during diagnostics. At stake is the health of the cylinder head and its repair or replacement. Worn camshaft cams, raised camshaft bed, flattened injector seals, all this needs to be known and prevented, without skimping on engine oil and by inspecting these components. Almost all of these engines have reached the 400,000 kilometers mileage until it becomes necessary to install repair bushings in the pump injector sockets. There are other little things and troubles either with the turbine or with the tandem pump. But in general, 1.9 TDI engines can be considered millionaires. 2.5 TDI PD, AXD 131 horsepower. 2.5 TDI PD, BNZ 131 horsepower. 2.5 TDI PD, AXE 174 horsepower. 2.5 TDI PD, BPC 174 horsepower. The inline-5 2.5 TDI is a controversial engine. Yes, there is more power here, but the timing drive is not a belt, but gears. The cylinder block is not cast iron, but made of aluminum alloy. There are no traditional liners. The surface of the cylinder is formed by special spraying directly onto the light alloy of the cylinder block. At one time this engine disappointed and scammed many owners of T5s and Tuaregs. In general, it is better to avoid this engine. However, many fans of bus do not think so. They calmly operate cars with an inline-5 and do not hesitate to chip them. In general, many problems with the inline 2.5 TDI can be avoided if you don't skimp on oil and don't drive the car like a tractor in the higher gear, lower rev style. As it turned out, when used in this style, the friction pairs do not have enough lubrication, and chips appear that damage everything, from the pressure relief valve to the plasma spraying. Here we add all the joys from the wear of the pump injector cylinder head. On the 2.5 TDI, the camshaft, its bed and rockers wore out much faster than on the 1.9 TDI. Sometimes with aggravating factors such as burnt valves, the cooling system pump rotates from the timing gears. If the pump leaks, and this happens, it will pour antifreeze directly into the pan. Friction pairs will only be happy. On engines designated AXD and AX, the exhaust manifold is made of stainless steel and will burst over time. Exhaust gases from the engine compartment are sucked into the cabin. There is no use in welding steel. The best solution is a non-original cast iron release. In general, the 2.5 TDI engine requires careful attention. 2.0 TDI, CAAB 102 horsepower. 2.0 TDI, CAAC 140 horsepower. 2.0 TDI, CCHA 140 horsepower. 2.0 TDI, CCHB 136 horsepower. 2.0 TDI, CFCA 180 horsepower. The restyled VW T5 said goodbye to the pump injectors. A 2-liter TDI with common rail injection began to be installed under the hood of the buses. This is a very pleasant engine that has said goodbye to the problems of its predecessors, has become more reliable and has a pleasing service life. The 2.0 TDI lasts more than 500,000 kilometers. Note that the 180 horsepower version equipped with a bit turbocharger. This motor has done a lot of things. Or rather, the engineers made a mistake. The aluminum cooler of the EGR system added metal dust to the exhaust gases, which rubbed the surfaces of the pistons, rings, and cylinders. Everything ended before the end of the warranty. Due to wear of the CPG, the Bitturbo engine began to consume oil, often drained the sump and, naturally, jammed. Buses with gasoline engines are rare. In fact, higher fuel consumption compared to diesel versions is their only drawback. 2.0 MPI, AXA 115 horsepower. Throughout its production, the VW T5 was offered with an old 2-liter naturally aspirated engine. This engine has a cast iron cylinder block, one camshaft in the cylinder head and 0 problems. During operation, attention is required to mere little things like sensors and ignition systems. The timing belt also needs to be changed. An extremely simple motor. So the question arises, is it worth relying on diesel economy in order to have it all costly to repair one day? 3.2 MPI VR6, BDL 231 horsepower, 3.2 MPI VR6, BKK, CFLA 235 horsepower. The most powerful engine for the VW T5 is an inline 3.2-liter naturally aspirated engine, also with a cast iron block. There are no problems with this engine either, but replacing timing chains is expensive. The VR6 easily lasts over 500,000 kilometers. The only argument against it is fuel consumption on average of 15 to 18 liters per 100 kilometers, 2.0 TSI, CJKB 150 horsepower, 2.0 TSI, CJKA 204 horsepower. After restyling, the VR6 engine was abandoned and replaced with a 2.0 TSI engine. These are engines of the EA 888 family of Generation 2. This engine is not bad, not very prone to oil consumption. However, due to the fuel injection pump, which passes gasoline into the oil, quite a few of these engines jammed. There were also problems with the destruction of pistons. VW T5 manual transmissions are considered reliable, but there are cases of synchronizer wear and splines on the gear selection mechanism being cut off. The 5-speed manual transmission of this car is rather weak. You may encounter wear on the rear bearing of the input shaft, and the differential may also fall apart. Literally all versions of the VW T5 with a manual transmission were equipped with a dual-mass flywheel. In combination with a diesel engine, it lasts about 200,000 kilometers, costs about $500 from the original manufacturer. There are also kits for replacing the flywheel with a single-mass one along with a clutch. Reviews about this decision are contradictory. The dual-mass flywheel of the VR6 engine is more than twice as expensive. There are no substitutes. 09K Aisin TF-61SN 6-street automatic transmission. The pre-restyling VW T5 with 2.5 TDI and 3.2 VR6 engines is equipped with an 09K automatic transmission. The original is an Aisin TF-61SN transmission. This is a decent transmission. With proper care, it can last up to 300,000 kilometers. It is necessary to change the oil in it at least once every 60,000 kilometers. DQ 500. 0BH, DQ 507 Street DSG. After restyling, the new 2.0 TDI and 2.0 TSI engines could be purchased not with a traditional automatic transmission, but with a pre-selective 7-speed DQ 500 transmission. This is one of the best DSGs, with wet clutches, for longitudinal installation. Reliable, resourceful and maintainable. If you don't skimp on oil and change it every 50,000 kilometers or more often, then the DQ 500 will run 300,000 kilometers or more before repair. The VW T5 was equipped with all-wheel drive. The rear axle is connected to a 4th-generation Haldex clutch. The clutch needs to be serviced every 50,000 kilometers. It has a filter, O2D 598-574, that needs to be replaced. It is recommended to remove the electric pump and clean its screen. The electric motor of the pump lasts about 200,000 kilometers and then fails, but can be repaired. Worn brushes and a worn commutator can be replaced. The driveshaft of the coupling for driving the rear axle is suspended on 2 bearings. Front one may howl after 200,000 kilometers, but it can be replaced separately. The rear one lasts longer, but if it starts to hum, you will have to look for a workshop that will replace it. Because in the original it exists only with the driveshaft itself. The VW T5 suspension is not particularly pleased with its resource life. In the McPherson-type front suspension, consumables are support bearings for shock absorber struts. Of course, everything depends on the operation, the quality of the roads and the weight of the cargo being transported, as well as on the quality of the support bearings themselves. They usually ask for replacement once a year. The symptoms of their wear are standard crunching, squeaking, and uneven force when turning the front wheels. Original bearings will cost $50 to $60 apiece. When replacing the support bearings, the front stabilizer links fall under the distribution. The original bone will cost $100. Both front control arm bushings and ball joint are sold separately. The rear silent block lasts more than 100,000 kilometers and costs $35. The ball joint is mounted on 2 bolts. The original one will cost $140. The wheel bearings of all T5 wheels are pressed into the hubs and are also not very durable. The front hubs for this bus came from the Touareg. The original ones cost $290. The rear ones cost $330. A good quality original is much cheaper. An unpleasant proprietary sore of the T5 is the splines of the inner right CV joint. The spline connection here is poorly protected from moisture and dirt. Therefore, the lubricant is washed out and replaced by dirt, which then causes wear on the splines. Be sure to note that there is an original lubricant that hardens in the spline joint and is not washed out. This is exactly what you need to use. If servicemen are not aware of this feature of the VW T5 right-hand drive and lubricate the splines with lithol, then very soon the lubricant will disappear there. At first, when starting off, jerks and impacts are felt. Often the splines suddenly wear out and break off. In general, the splines here are rather weak. They can break if the driver drops the clutch or makes a couple of trips with an overload. After the axle shaft splines break naturally, the minivan will not get anywhere under its own power. The original right inner CV joint will cost almost $600. Good substitutes are 2 to 3 times cheaper. The rear suspension lasts quite a long time. The silent blocks of its rear levers are sold separately. The steering rack on the VW T5 is conventional hydraulic. As a rule, it lasts a long time and requires repair due to the appearance of play. Also, with high mileage, oil leaks appear at the hose fittings, including the folding near the power steering fluid cooling radiator. Separately, we note that the power steering pump on the version with the 2.5 TDI engine is driven by a gear from the timing gear drive, which is located on the flywheel side. The pump housing is sealed, figuratively speaking, with the timing case. It has been noticed that when the seals wear out, the power steering pump can suck in engine oil. At the same time, the liquid level in the expansion tank will increase. In this case, you need to replace the entire power steering pump as soon as possible or repair it and replace the seals. Engine oil from a diesel engine will greatly damage the condition of all steering components. Naturally, all the oil in the GRU system in the tank will have to be replaced with new ones. Steering rods are weak. In the original they are sold together with tips. For such a set you will have to pay $250 for one side. Sets of good substitutes are 5 times cheaper. Tie rods are sold separately only from less well-known brands. As usual, let's start with the body, the quality of its paint and corrosion resistance. In principle, the T5 does not rust quickly, at least on the outside. However, the bottom of the bead is such that it is poorly covered with any shields from dirt and reagents, and there are simply enough pockets where all these catalysts of corrosion end up. Therefore, when purchasing, inspecting the bottom for corrosion is a separate task. If we talk about paint and rust in prominent places, the T5S began to upset owners literally in the 3rd year of operation. Door handles are made in such a way that when opened and closed they damage the paint layer. The paint is chipping around the front of the handles and around the back. Experienced owners, after repainting, glued armor film to simply protect the paint around the handles. You can also install handles from the updated T5. They do not touch the paint layer when opening the door. Then on young T5S, rust spots appeared on the sills and the sliding door openings. With age, corrosion appears on the lower edges of the doors, paint peeling around the rear door handle and on top around the brake light. In general, almost any paint chips on the body of a VW T5 end with an even larger piece of paint, the size of a coin, falling off around the chip. Quite quickly the paint peels off where it is exposed to sand, thresholds, arches, etc. But, as a rule, it doesn't go beyond purely cosmetic bald spots with a slight red coating. In general, the first owners of T5S had to repaint the entire car after 5 years of operation in order to rid it of numerous flaws in the factory paint. Headlights and optional fog lights on the VW T5 are literally nothing. The light is bad because it is weak. No super duper light bulbs will help improve the standard light. Over the years, the lampshades become cloudy and the coating on the reflectors peels off. The rear license plate light dies due to moisture getting into the lamps. You can buy and change Chinese lampshades. Someone seals the old standard ones by installing pieces of LED strip in them. The rear wiper motor may fail due to water entering its housing. Sometimes, due to damage to the electrical board, it continues to work even after being turned off. As a rule, breakdowns due to moisture in the wiper motor occur on versions with a rear double hinge door and a little less often on versions with a single lifting door. The sliding door is very convenient. The opening is huge. When open, it literally takes up no space. You have to pay for this by wearing out the guide rollers. Due to their wear, the door begins to rattle while driving on uneven surfaces. Rollers along with brackets are offered by a variety of non-original manufacturers. The door may also rattle due to wear on the lock bracket. The lock will no longer tightly secure the door to it. Here it is better to replace the bracket with a new one. Sometimes the sliding door stops opening either from the outside or from the inside. As a rule, removing the entire lock mechanism and then cleaning it and lubricating it solves the problem. Along the way, you can find broken rods, their fastenings, or broken teeth in the gear parts of the lock mechanism. If the sliding door lock does not respond to commands from the central lock, then the reason is the lack of contact in the contact group of the lock. There is no contact due to wear of the group or due to sagging of the door. There are also cases of malfunction of the comfort unit due to moisture getting into it or incorrect coating. The comfort unit on the pre-restyling T5 is located under the passenger seat. Let's add that the sliding door handle may break off, as it were. When pulled out, it comes out too far out. You will also have to remove the casing and look for broken and torn parts in the cable drive to the handle. It often happens that the paint on the inside of the front doors, right under the plastic trim, wears down to metal and rusts. This is the result of sagging hinges and wear on the lock shackle. It's also not uncommon for the inside handle of the navigator's door, and even the driver's door, to be wrapped in electrical tape or tied with zip ties. In this way, they are repaired after the inner lining breaks off. It breaks off if the passenger or driver does not grab the handle when closing it with his whole palm, but tries to grab it with his claws. That's when their claws tear off the lining. By the way, you can continue your search for rust in the VW T5 interior. You need to pay attention to the middle row seat supports. They may be rusty. The carpet under these seats may be damp. Naturally, corrosion can appear under damp carpet. Where is the source of the problem? And here it is. Sliding windows on the middle windows allow water to pass through, which flows onto the floor and threshold both through the door and from the outside along its upholstery, or on the upholstery of the left wall of the cabin, if there is no sliding door there. Usually the culprit is a dried-out window seal. It may not fit well due to worn or even cracked guide pins. In general, if water pours into the cabin during rain or car wash, you need to change the window seal. If the window stops opening, then one of the stopper rods has probably jumped out of the rotating plate of the lock. You will have to disassemble the window fittings and replace worn parts, a plate or a rod with a broken tip. Almost all fans of the VW T5 have a kind word for VAG engineers because they put microcs, that is, microswitches, in all the locks. When one of the microswitches fails, the door open indicator on the panel lights up, and at the same time the light in the cabin also comes on. Or vice versa, the light does not light up, or it all randomly lights up while moving while shaking. Original microswitches are expensive. Chinese ones barely last a year. Craftsmen make microswitches based on reed switches and magnets, or install suitable microcs in suitable places. Over the years of operation, the VW T5 may stop turning on the headlights. The reason is in the switch. The contact plates in it are simply wiped out or stop connecting tightly. A non-original switch can be bought even in China. Although craftsmen simply open the switch housing, clean and bend the contacts. The T5's air conditioning system is weak. Passenger versions have two air conditioning radiators. Their tubes are laid along the starboard side. In the rear right wheel arch behind the locker there are aluminum pipes for supplying coolant and pipes to the heater. At the rear of the arch there is also an air conditioning expansion valve. All these components are poorly covered and are under attack from reagents. The pipes simply burst and the refrigerant evaporates from the system. Owners either weld the tubes with argon if they can still be saved. Either they replace them with new ones, the original will cost $350 to $400, or they install hoses. Even the T5s are not averse to bursting the pipes to the front air conditioner radiator, and the radiators themselves took 5 to 7 years to take care of. Therefore, if this bus's air conditioning does not cool, there is 90% a hole in the system somewhere. By the way, if a significant amount of freon leaves the system, hot air will blow from the right deflector, and cold air will blow from the driver's side. Let us add that the air conditioning compressor of this car lasts an average of 3 to 5 years. The entire air conditioning system is perfectly checked by a diagnostic scanner. Therefore, before replacing the compressor, it is worth finding the real culprit why the ventilation does not cool. In some cases, it is enough to replace the control valve on the air conditioning compressor. The valve regulates the displacement and therefore the performance of the compressor. There is no electromagnetic clutch in the compressor drive. Instead, there is a pulley with a damper. Due to the destruction of the damper, the compressor simply will not work. Let's complete the story about the air conditioning system by saying that the servos of the switching flaps in the bowels of the front panel sometimes fail. The problem is the same as on the Passat B6. Due to the failure of servo drives, the regulation of temperature and air flow is disrupted, and errors appear due to the malfunction of specific drives. Well, problems with them are related to the built-in potentiometers. The servos can be opened, cleaned and the potentiometer antennae adjusted. This will help if its tracks are not worn almost through. The fan of the air conditioning and heating system on the multivan can also cause a malfunction. This applies to both the front fan and the rear fan for passenger T5s. The front one suffers from street dust and dirt because installed not after, but before the filter. Usually the fan stops working at high speed or simply jams. In general, according to the regulations, it needs to be cleaned once a year. To do this, the right side of the front panel is not so difficult to disassemble. The rear heater fan is also ready to be cleaned after a while. It will also stop starting